Greetings, friends, greetings. Welcome to the Crossroads Show, episode 2. I'm your host, Nico. In today's episode, I'm going to be laying out my argument against the widespread implementation of vaccine passports. It's going to be quite a long one, and I'm going to show you a couple of clips from different places in order to supplement the points that I'm going to make. If you do enjoy this episode of the Crossroads Show, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more episodes in the very near future of both the podcast, where I talk about, the latest issues and what's happening, and of course the show where I go more in depth and elaborate on bigger ideas and concepts that I think we should all be familiarizing ourselves with in this time in history. So without further ado, here is my argument against vaccine passports. Alright, so I think that a good place to start is to just give you a sort of big picture, low resolution overview of my argument against vaccine passports. So the way I see it, vaccine passports represent a critical juncture in the world, really, that if implemented in a widespread manner, which it currently seems to be the case, if implemented worldwide, they will constitute the first true step towards a system of digital global governance based on biometric data, on digital identification for every individual on planet Earth, all of which will be based on blockchain, and of course the 5G networks that are currently being rolled out worldwide, much like the vaccines are being rolled out worldwide. So of course, this might sound ridiculous, it might sound exaggerated, it might sound like fear-mongering, especially to those that have not been really following what's been happening aside from what you hear in the mainstream media. So of course the first question one might ask is why vaccine passports? We already have phones, apps that connect us to the internet, and why aren't they doing this already? Well, first of all, they already are doing this. But second of all, I think vaccine passports are the perfect opportunity to implement such a system because of just how widespread vaccination and the current rollout of vaccines against COVID is. I think that right now, as this video is being recorded, there have been about 710 million vaccine doses globally, which represents about 10% of the global population. And this does not seem to be stopping anytime soon. There have been all sorts of concerns about, especially regarding the AstraZeneca vaccine and blood clots, but that doesn't seem to have really stopped anything. Of course, in a couple of podcast episodes ago, I talked about Canada stopping the vaccination with AstraZeneca of people under 50 years of age because of this blood clot issue. But despite that, basically, the larger point I'm trying to make here is that there hasn't really been any significant pushback against the notion that vaccination is the best way out of this COVID crisis, so-called. So that's why I think that this vaccination certificate, digital, importantly, vaccination certificate, really constitutes the first true step towards this digital global governance system. Again, there have been many other more minor steps that have happened, but this is it, I think. And this is why I think that it's a critical juncture, that if it is implemented, if it is accepted by governments worldwide, it's going to be quite difficult to roll back. Of course, there's been talk in the UK, for example, of only making them temporary. They're going to make vaccine passports for a year and then we're going to be done. I mean, that's ridiculous, I think, especially for coming from the government. These, biometrics after 9/11 were supposed to be a temporary thing, but they've kind of become part and parcel of the whole system. Even, our passports, the passports I have here, have biometric, this little chip here. So yeah, that's basically the whole, not the whole argument, but the core, the central part of the argument is that it's going to be very difficult to go back if they are implemented. But okay, so people might, especially as I said, the people that haven't been following what's been happening, they might scoff, they might be like, oh, that's ridiculous, we just need this to get back to normal life. It's just going to be like the yellow fever passports that you need. in order to get to certain countries. But I think those arguments really fall flat because, first of all, when it comes to, for example, yellow fever yellow fever vaccination proof, basically, you need it to get in certain countries. I agree. These vaccine passports are different because they're talking about them not just to move out of the country or to go to other places around the world, but really to go to the pub, to buy food, to buy groceries, and to do all sorts of things that we do in a normal day. So that's a fundamental way, I think, that these things are different. Yellow fever also has a much higher mortality rate than COVID, so that's also a non-starter for me. They're just not the same. And as for the argument that we need them to go back to normal life, I really think that's just propaganda, and that it's been propped up by the sort of powers that be that I'm going to get into now, and that I've already talked about in the first episode of the Crossroads Show when it comes to big banks, big corporate interests, big pharma, big tech, and all these entities that are pretty much not controlling the world, fine, but they have huge amounts of power in the world today, and power that rivals really most governments worldwide, which is going to be another point that I'm going to expand further upon later. So again, vaccine passports, the way I see it, represent a critical juncture in the world, really, not just on a national level, but on a global scale. And in order to understand why, I think that we really need to look at the larger context and where we are in history, especially when it comes to technology, technological advancement, digitalization, data-ism, the sort of religion of data that I'm going to talk about it in a moment by reading a few quotes from this book by Yuval Noah Harari, which I actually read back in 2018, but is very relevant right now in terms of the issues that we're going to discuss. So the bigger context, again, to go back, there's a technological context that we need to look into, and a financial, economic, really, context that a lot of people, I think, are aware of, because everyone knows about inequality and extreme wealth inequality especially, but people don't really seem, the general populace, making a big general statement here, they don't really see these issues together. They see them as different points on a board, if you will, but they really have not connected the dots. And that's what I'm going to try to do as well in this episode. I'm going to try connect some of these dots for you and see if they make sense to you, because they make sense to me, and see where we can go from there. So when it comes to the technological context, I just mentioned digitalization, this increased tendency of technology to mediate all of our interactions, all of our activities in life, whether it's social media, the way, especially under this new COVID, new normal, so to speak, which I hate that term. Increasingly our interactions are being mediated by technology, whether it's meeting on Zoom for work, or social media in itself, Instagram, Facebook, all these ways that we interact with people, increasingly WhatsApp, on a daily basis. There is the Internet of Things, this new, it's not even a concept because it's real, it's happening, this new tendency of objects to be connected to the internet, and that also goes into data-ism, which I will read in a moment a little bit about from Homo Deus. And these things are very important to keep in mind because they play a big role in the new world that we're about to enter, and we've already arguably entered for a few years now. And because this new normal that a lot of people have been talking about now is really a massive extension of what we're going through now. So let me just read you a little bit in terms of data-ism and the data religion. So this is page 428 of Homo Deus, and I'll just read you a few quotes just to help put all of this in context, and then I will expand further from there. So the data religion. So data-ism declares that the universe consists of data flows, and the value of any phenomenon or entity is determined by its contribution to data processing. This may strike you as some eccentric fringe notion, but in fact, it has already conquered most of the scientific establishment. For politicians, business people, and ordinary consumers, data-ism offers groundbreaking technologies and immense new powers. For scholars and intellectuals, it also promises to provide the scientific holy grail that has eluded us for centuries, a single, overarching theory that unifies all the scientific disciplines from musicology through economics to biology, which we'll see in a moment. I have a very interesting clip that I've mentioned a few times in the podcast, and I think maybe in the first episodes of the Crossroads Show. And that video is by the World Economic Forum. It's on YouTube, and it's titled, "What is the Fourth Industrial Revolution?" And I'll show you, I think, the entirety of it, actually. It's 10 minutes or 11 minutes. And I really do think that it's important to understand that these people that are getting together to reset society really do believe in these things. They believe in the integration of the physical, the biological, and the digital. And for this, the power that supposedly this new integration gives to usher in this new era of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And again, it might sound like I'm completely going away from the whole issue of vaccine passports, but trust me, I'm really not, because as I stated, my argument is that the vaccine passports is the real first true step towards this data-ism, increased digitalization, technology mediating all of our interactions, becoming ever more true. So Yuval Noah Harari continues by saying that according to data-ism, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, a stock exchange bubble, and the flu virus are just three patterns of data flow that can be analyzed using the same basic concepts and tools. This idea is extremely attractive. It gives all scientists a common language, builds bridges over academic rifts, and easily exports insights across disciplinary borders. Musicologists, economists, and cell biologists can finally understand each other. In the process, data-ism inverts the traditional pyramid of learning. Hitherto, data was seen as only the first step in a long chain of intellectual activity. Humans were supposed to distill data into information, information into knowledge, and knowledge into wisdom. However, dataists believe that humans can no longer cope with the immense flows of data, hence they cannot distill data into information, let alone into knowledge or wisdom. The work of processing data should therefore be entrusted to electronic algorithms, AI, whose capacity far exceeds that of the human brain. In practice, this means that dataists are skeptical about human knowledge and wisdom and prefer to put their trust in big data and computer algorithms. So again, I just wanted to quote a few lines from the book to help you, again, put into context everything that I'm saying. This is not science fiction. This is, as Harari states in the book, pretty much the new dogma within the scientific community as a whole. So having said that, I'm now going to show you the clip by the World Economic Forum titled, "What is the Fourth Industrial Revolution?" that is hopefully going to help you, again, put this into place and connect a few dots, because many people just dismiss this kind of stuff. They think it's nonsense. They think it's science fiction. They think it's just futuristic BS. But what I'm trying to show you here is that this stuff is here and it's happening, and there are people actively working towards these kinds of systems becoming the new reality, the new foundation of our society. So having said that, let me show you this clip, and I will see you in about 10-11 minutes after it's done, and I will continue to expand further on my argument and hopefully connect more dots and talk about, on the other hand, the financial aspect of all of this, which is massively, massively important. It's not more important, I think, but it's incredibly essential to understand the big picture here. So I'll see you in a moment.
We are wondering what is happening to the world. Everything is changing.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Inside our own heads, is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe.
You might ask yourself, can we get to be superhumans?
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
But that was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the fourth industrial revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
With the ability to visualize brain activity, for example, through a simple consumer-based EEG device, it gives us access to ourselves in ways that we've never before thought possible. It unlocks the black box that is the brain and enables us to really, truly be able to realize an identity that is aspirational.
There's now a scientific foundation for the effects of mindfulness on the brain, on the genome, on biological aging. And when the human mind does know itself, then you get the potential for a new renaissance that restructures itself in terms of our relationship to life, our relationship to the planet, our relationship to work.
We need a different economic model. By that I don't mean capitalism versus communism. What I'm talking about is a shift in the system along the lines of the two big changes that happened in the 20th century, Keynesianism, with a much greater focus on health and education and the role of government working with business, and then a reaction against that in late century to neoliberalism, where the focus was on free markets, freedom of the individual, and getting governments out of the way. We need a shift to a new system that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, that will live within planetary means, that will be fairer, and that will be focused as its key goal, not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being. And history tells us that a values shift is triggered by creation of a new story about how we want to live.
I see the circular economy as something which fits very closely with mankind's goal to be innovative and creative and to always progress. We can use asset tracking, we can use IT, we can use 3D printing to enable this different economic model to recover materials, feed them back into the economy, and really to decouple growth from the resource constraints we have.
The reason we live in cities is not different today than it was 10,000 years ago. Even if we have got networks connecting us, we still want to have places where we meet in person. So this means the place where we work and the place where we live are much closer to each other, a city where we don't need to have big supply chains in order to produce things, where many things can be sourced locally thanks to 3D printing and robotics. So if we're able to do something to transform cities, to make them more efficient, then the impact can be huge.
Think about the prospect of getting rid of plastics. We must not only be inspired or informed by nature, but actually use natural organisms with which to design products and building parts. Only instead of varying material properties, we're varying biological functionality.
Design is critical today because it's the first signal of human intention. So the question of adding quality to quantity, it isn't a matter of simply circulating things that are potentially toxic. It's circulating things that are safe and healthy for all generations. So the goal is no longer, I want to be less bad, less monotonous, less unsafe, less unjust. It's really about a diverse, safe, healthy, and just world with clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy.
Together we are fighting to preserve our fragile climate from irreversible damage and devastation of unthinkable proportions.
If we think about the original Industrial Revolution, it was an energy revolution. I like to think of it as a kind of bookending of a period in human history during which we used fossil fuels, and it worked very well for us for a long time. But now we have to bring that to an end. We have energy technologies that can power our civilization: solar, wind, biomass. So then the question is, well, how do we get grid integration? Maybe the wind is blowing in Denmark, the sun is shining in Germany, and now you can move that electricity through an integrated grid. You can supply energy to everyone who needs it, and you can supply energy at all times.
Walking around, you do see different stuff as far as like the body marriage line. They use a lot of things that help them lift up and move things to the car. You just sit there and, program something, and it has its own set mind to go ahead and do everything. And then as humans, we just come in and take the extra step to help the technology.
It's not the cure-all for everything. There's definitely a lot of things where people perform the operation better, but certainly for the right applications, robotics are a huge improvement for the process.
The prediction of 5 million jobs lost by 2020 to technology is serious, but it's not the main question. Construction, manufacturing, services, public health and education, these industries will still exist. The main question is, what will be the future of work? How will we define work? How will we share the wealth?
From the viewpoint of the labor or jobs, now we really need new education or new training.
We're working with a World in Motion in FIRST Robotics, trying to encourage students from third grade all the way up through the end of high school. We had students make sailboats, and then we had them race them, and so they could see how quickly they could move. And they immediately went back and started to say, oh, I saw what happened, I'm going to go change this or that. And that was third graders.
I just given a prize to a kid of 18 years old that has discovered something really very, very unique. Came up with how to get better productivity and better yields for seeds of corn. And so he basically came with the idea that if you would perforate these seeds, you would get more food. And you think about it, you say, but he didn't go to university. So how does he get all that knowledge? And he told me, I've been watching YouTube since the age of 12, and I'm so interested that I've seen everything about it. I've read everything about it. The world is really open to learning. The thing is, how do you give the incentive to your kids to do that?
It's this ability of digital technology to change outcomes, to truly empower people all over the world that can create a more equitable growth, because I think the world needs that.
Fourth industrial revolution has the potential to make inequalities visible and to make them less acceptable in the future, and hopefully to gather and garner political support to take the necessary decision to reduce the gap.
Humans have always been using tools, but because of the recent advances in technology, we're beginning to have machines that can augment us in all sorts of interesting ways.
I was the first person in the world to be able to voluntarily move my legs while stepping in a robot by exciting the nervous system using electrical stimulators directly onto the spine. We believe that a cure will be possible if enough of the right people have the will to fast-track a cure for paralysis.
We take two things from the patient. First, we take a three-dimensional X-ray, and we extract the three-dimensional data out of that so we can make a perfectly shaped puzzle piece. And then we also take a sample of fat tissue from the patient so that we can extract the stem cells out of those. And we use those stem cells with this three-dimensional scaffold that we fabricate, and after 3 weeks, we have a piece of living bone that's ready for implantation.
Being able to use genome editing to understand the genetic changes that lead to cancer, and technologies like drug delivery, getting molecules into particular types of cells. There's a lot of excitement about being able to move much more quickly on this disease.
One of the things that I think is so essential to free and open societies is freedom of thought. And up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Once we can access people's thoughts and access people's emotion, we have to create a space that enables people to think freely, to think divergent thoughts, to think creative thoughts. And in a society where people fear having those thoughts, the likelihood of being able to enjoy progress is significantly diminished.
We need to take responsibility at every level of society, from the individual and the personal to the institutional to the global, to adapt to these technological challenges and changes which are redefining what it means to be human, what it means to work, what it means to be completely embedded in this world.
People always ask me if I'm an optimist or a pessimist. The technology exists, but how do we get it and implement it at the scale we need at a price that people around the world can afford?
Even though we have everyday problems we have to solve, we have to find a way to lay the foundations for the innovations of tomorrow.
Very interesting, isn't it? A lot to take from that video. It's very, partly definitely overwhelming because just of the sheer scale at which these new technologies could really change us. You've seen at the beginning of the video, Mr. Klaus Schwab himself talking about, this doesn't change what we do. All sorts of questions about that as well, because supposedly what we're doing is destroying the planet. But anyway, the main point he made there was that it changes who we are. This whole merging of the digital, the physical, and the biological, which certainly raises ethical, philosophical, deep philosophical questions. So I can definitely appreciate the push for these changes and even the reasoning behind many of them. But again, what concerns me is the fact that leading this charge for, whether you call this Great Reset, Fourth Industrial Revolution, the same public-private organization is behind these initiatives. So what concerns me is that, it's many of the people and institutions that are chiefly responsible for the situation that we're in today that have partnered up with the World Economic Forum and with each other, really, in order to usher in this new age and this new era for humanity. So as far as I'm concerned, videos like these are really just pushing almost like a brand for these new changes, and they give you a very sort of rosy, they do ask a few questions, but the picture really is very futuristic. Well, we're finally going to get to that stage where we can be equal to one another and cooperate and all these beautiful ideas. But is that really going to be the reality? Is that really going to be is it really going to be implemented in this equal fashion where we can all share the spoils, and it's going to be inclusive capitalism and stakeholder-based capitalism and all these, again, wonderful ideas? Well, arguably wonderful, because there's some of them that even I would disagree with. And not to mention the whole, looking into people's thoughts thing, that's a bit creepy and weird. But again, given the technologies that we're working on now with nanotechnology and all these microchips and all this stuff, it's also, on the other hand, the kind of thing that someone like a dictator like Hitler would have been perfectly happy to have. So I think that a lot of these new systems hinge almost on the idea that the people that are going to be in power are going to be good people. Because the moment you have, and I made this point I think in the previous episode of the show, the moment you have someone with a bit more authoritarian dictatorial tendencies that is going to be able to make decisions that impact so many people, whether it's because it doesn't matter if it's a president now, it can be a CEO of a company with outlandish ideas about the world. And I think I would argue that many of the CEOs that we have in tech companies now have these very, very detached, out of touch ideas about society and humanity and human nature and the world. So I think, again, going back to the point I was trying to make, it hinges on these people being good and not using these for nefarious intentions, which, I would say that as soon as you have the power, so much power, you almost have to assume that it's going to be used the wrong way. So that's why I'm very skeptical of this sort of thing and the sort of arguments and points made in the video. Then you had, very interestingly, towards the beginning, this guy talking about Keynesianism at the start of the 20th century, and then the sort of push back from neoliberalism and how now we need a new system. And I think, based on what he's saying and what the World Economic Forum is saying, is that this new system is going to be based on this very strong alliance between public and private sectors, which, if you look at history, there's a name for that, because in fascist Italy and Germany, that was the whole idea, the merging of state and business enterprise together. But I hope you're starting to see the potential dangers, and I'm going to elaborate on that as well, because I have a few sort of top concerns that ultimately stem down from this video and the arguments I'm trying to make, because ultimately it's not even about the vaccine passports themselves. It's about the kind of precedent that it sets in our society and the potential pathways that we can then go down and descend upon as a society that are going to be potentially destructive, genocidal, and just bad for us, basically. So that was the technological aspect. Now I'm going to focus more on the financial aspect, which is very, very important to consider, because as they talked about in the video, they talked about inequality, and I made the point that a lot of the people that have gotten together in order to come up with these initiatives and change the planet and change the world for the better, inequality and stakeholder capitalism, are the people who are chiefly being responsible for many of the crises that we are currently undergoing, from the financial crisis in 2008, but not only the boom and bust cycles that we've been seeing that have been destroying the middle class and putting wealth at the top of society, to even climate change itself. And there's a whole point that I'm not going to address here because it's a whole other can of worms, and it's the impact of these technologies on the planet. These technologies aren't going to be in the cloud. They need minerals. They need all sorts of mining and real life resources that, again, of course, are going to be mostly based in the global south, in developing nations, so-called, which I think are going to result in a whole other plundering and a sort of new, almost, if you will, form of colonialism. And but again, as I said, I'm not going to get into that because that opens a whole other host of issues. But anyway, just to reiterate the points about inequality, you can see some stats here. The world's richest have more than twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people. Almost half of humanity is living on less than $5.50 a day. Only 4 cents in every dollar of tax revenue comes from taxes on wealth. Interestingly, there was I think not this year at Davos, but the year before, the guy that made a point, I forget who he was, I think it was a journalist, and he went to speak at Davos, and he made the point, you can talk about all these ideas about stakeholder capitalism and all this kind of stuff, but ultimately you guys don't pay tax. Like you rich people that get together and talk about these issues year after year pay peanuts in tax revenue, and the taxes that are supposed to, there's all arguments in terms of that as well, but taxes that are supposed to go back to society, whether it's for social services, benefits, and all these things, and these people don't pay tax. So again, you have the same institutions, same corporations, same individual billionaires that are telling the world, we all need to change and do this and that. But ultimately, they're still going to fly on their jets. They're still going to contribute to a vast, disproportionate share of the carbon footprint, which is made up to be this whole big issue. There's a big disconnect, I think, between the things that are being said here and the whole Great Reset agenda and this whole inclusive capitalism thing and action and the actions of these people that ultimately are not paying anything in tax. So how's that going to change? Is this whole new system supposed to change that now? I doubt that. So that's the one point about inequality and wealth distribution. The fact that I don't think it's mentioned here, but lack of access to clean water, for example, a problem that could be not easily solved, but if really people got together, they could drastically reduce the amount of children who die every day from diarrhea, for example, that I mentioned in the last podcast episode. I think 2,000 children every day die from diarrhea-related illnesses and dehydration and all these issues. And you have that, and on the other hand, you have this massive billion-dollar vaccine rollout in order to fight a disease with a 99% plus survival rate. And again, that's a whole other disconnect, which I can kind of understand in the context of if all I'm saying, if I'm right about all of this, and I can see why there's a massive push towards big pharma, new products, new experimental treatments that are going to make billions for big pharma and all the investors that have invested their money in that. But again, there's the massive disconnect in that regard. So the other issue in terms of finance, and perhaps even the more important one, and the reason why there are calls for a reset of the system, is this: debt. And this is just the US, $28 trillion 150 billion, 384 million, 300, 400. It's going. You can't even keep up. And this, again, it's just the US. Does it show the countries? No, it's just the US debt clock. But, look at the defense spending. Look at all these, this is just fairy money as far as I'm concerned. But that's another issue that is very problematic for the world, and why I think that we've seen so many calls to reset the economic system, not just to reset society, to reset ourselves, to merge ourselves with physical, digital, biological, whatever. Also, this comes down to money, because as I've said before, money ultimately runs the world, and there are massive interests behind all of this. And a perfect example that I want to show you, it's just a 1 minute clip. I won't even I'll keep my face on the screen for this. But this is what I like to call, and it's not my coining of the term, but like social license. I'm not sure who came up with it. I've learned about it only in the last couple of days. But social license basically refers to how these things are sold to the larger public, basically. Once something has social license, then think about something like climate change, for example. Climate change has pretty much social license all over the planet. People have accepted that it's an issue and that things need to be done about it. And that ultimately facilitates the response and all the plans, all these, zero carbon emissions, greening of the economy and all these things. People accept those things, not only because of the labels that sound good and stuff, but because ultimately over the years, they have accepted that these are issues that need to be tackled. And what I think that these large corporate powers, big tech, financial interests are doing is that they're trying to get the social approval for these massive plans, essentially by rebranding. So I like to see this as a massive sort of rebranding of capitalism. But again, the question is whether this rebranding is actually going to follow through with the stated intentions that we've seen, for example, in the Fourth Industrial Revolution video, or whether it's just a big scheme to continue the same exact way and just kind of tweak some things, like, put lipstick on the pig, as they say. Yeah, so this little clip, I think, is the perfect example of this kind of thing. And this is not the Great Reset, actually. This is the Imperative 21, which was started, I don't think by NASDAQ, but it's definitely NASDAQ in partnership with other, of course, corporate interests. So just take a look and see what this is. It's just a billboard in, I think, in Times Square in New York City. It's just the future we want to reset. Not extractive, regenerative. It's not a minimum wage, it's a living wage. Respect, of course. Shared prosperity. And there we have it. Imperative 21. NASDAQ is proud to support the reset. And if I think it's naive to think that these big public-private organization, corporate interests are not, of course, talking to one another. Another term for this reset, I think, is the new normal, build back better. All these buzz terms, essentially, to get the public to get the stamp, to get the social approval on these new systems. And now, of course, I have to link it back to the whole passport issue. So hopefully now you can start to see why I think that this whole digital passport certificate thing is a big step towards this new normal. And as you've seen from the video, it's very blockchain based. It's very, all digital. Again, the point I made in the beginning, technology mediating all of our interactions, essentially. And I think a core point that I have not really touched on is that it's the precedent aspect of these sorts of vaccines. Because if people accept that you're going to get an app now where you can have a green little feel-good QR code that you scan and they let you in, And that's hinges on you getting an invasive medical procedure in the form of an experimental mRNA vaccine in you. If that precedent is set, that's also why I think that it's going to be so hard to go back. Because if people accept that as a society, what are we not going to accept? Next thing, there's been a lot of talks about cashless, which I think is an integral part of this whole new system, because if you don't have cashless, it's all going to be a digital sort of money-based. That's going to make it much easier for these big corporations to get our data, in partnership with government, because I do really think that what we're seeing flourishing now is this new form of governance, of just a system that mixes, the public and the private together. So again, if that happens, it's going to be much easier for them to take our data, to know what we're doing at all times, to monitor our interactions. I have a very interesting clip, again, to show you in a little bit, from China, where all of this is blockchain based, and it's happening already. Facial recognition. You walk into a store, don't even need to do anything. You just pick up what you want, because it's all kind of happening in real time with the data exchange and stuff. And it's all linked to this app. And this app doesn't just have, I don't even think that they're doing are they doing a massive rollout of vaccines in China? No, because it's already a communist country, I think. So they don't really need to do that. So, but again, it's all integrated. You have your WeChat, I think. You have your payments, your banking, I think your health data. And I really do think that that's the kind of thing that we're heading towards in the West as well. Because the West, as they've learned about lockdowns being such an effective way to manage the virus, and they copied that here, I think they're going to see, look, it's kind of working in China. They have a perfect mix of the worst aspect of communism and the worst aspects of capitalism. They merge them together. Now maybe we can do the same. Of course, I am being slightly cynical here. But again, the evidence, as far as I'm concerned, seem to be pointing in that direction. So now I want to talk about more the things that I'm actually, if this all didn't sound like things that I'm kind of afraid of and very wary of, now I want to get more into the detail of the potential paths that we're going to descend upon. And the first is universal basic income, because we've already seen institutions like the World Economic Forum pushing for things like universal basic income. And this was back actually in April of 2020, so just a couple of months into the official launching of the pandemic. See what I did there. So universal basic income is the answer to the inequalities exposed by COVID-19. And I won't read you all of it, just a couple of quotes. It is time to add a new element to the policy packages that governments are introducing, one we know but have abandoned, UBI. It is needed as part of the package that will help us to get out of this yawning pit. Talk about the naysayers, the people that criticize, valid concerns, okay. But of course, during these times, we need to kickstart sputtering economies. The payoff of social stability would be tremendous, making an even more powerful argument for UBI. So a new social contract needs to emerge from this crisis that rebalances deep inequalities that are prevalent across society. To put it bluntly, the question should no longer be whether resources for effective social protections can be found, but how they can be found. UBI promises to be a useful element in such a framework. And again, I don't want to get into the whole article, but basically, they're pushing for things like UBI, and this was back, as I said, in April, right at the beginning of this so-called crisis. So why I wanted to talk about this is that there's another article that I'm going to show you in a moment, is that people like to think of UBI as this, it is an incredible idea, I think. But the issue is, again, goes back to who is implementing it. How is it being done? What is it going to be means tested? What kind of things are we in danger of when we allow such large-scale plans when it comes to the distribution of basic income, for example, which supposedly, again, as they're saying, is going to play a massive role in the recovery. And what worries me are things like this. So this is the Manchester Evening News. an article from just a few days ago. It was the 6th of April, so 3 days ago. Warning issued to anyone on benefits or universal credit with social media accounts. And the article, it's quite a good article, well written, and it goes into the fact that the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions in the UK, keeps an eye on the social media accounts of people who are on benefits. And here they say anyone who is on benefits or universal credit can have their social media and bank accounts monitored at any time, it has been reported. It is estimated that over 20 million people in the UK are currently claiming benefits, and this figure continues to rise as the pandemic progresses. And of course, it's gonna be a shitstorm when furlough ends and when we actually start to feel the real economic impact of this massive lockdown of the economy and society. And in all sorts of ways. I mean, as I said, it's going to be incredible what happens when furlough ends. Because so far, what I think is the governments around the world have just been basically printing money. They've been hiding the real statistics when it comes to inflation and the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And we're basically just kicking the can down the road. But we know, and I can assure you that big financial interests and banks know that this cannot be sustained for longer, which is, I think, another reason why there's a whole system reset that is required. But the article goes on, and it's quite disconcerting. So if this is happening now, imagine if something like UBI gets implemented. And this is why I want to show you something else, which is a very, very good article by activist post titled Universal Basic Income and the Road to Serfdom. And I just want to show you a quote here that encapsulates everything I'm saying in the perfect manner. Because if you think that there's just going to be UBI and every single person is just going to get payments all the time, regardless of whatever, you are mistaken. And while I can agree, as the quote is going to talk about in a moment, about maybe egregious criminals not getting UBI, even that I find kind of uncomfortable with, because does that mean they're not going to be able to buy food at all? Like, what does that actually imply? But I see no reason why, given the current climate around, for example, like vaccine hesitancy and the way people have been talking about people who don't want to take vaccines, and it's really getting nasty in many ways, I don't see why down the road, and that's the other concern that I have, we're not going to end up with some sort of social credit system. And I'll read you the quote so you can actually see what I'm trying to say here. So the UBI, again, I'll link the article, of course, in the show notes, as always, and you can read it for yourself. So forgive me if it starts kind of halfway down the article, but what I want to really focus on is the quote. So the UBI, Samarov reminds us, is a government program. And we ought always to view the state as an enemy of liberty. Always, remember that, kids. Always see the state as an enemy of liberty. It is precisely the feature of the UBI that its supporters emphasized, its universal coverage, which would enable the state to exercise tyrannical control, Samarov says. Now, basic income guarantee may begin universal, but as the years wear on and it proves expensive to grant, corners may be cut to ensure its continuance. Hardly anyone will object to the UBI being withdrawn from criminals, for example, as I said, and then perhaps from antisocial behavior. Petty crimes, like littering in the street, might lead people to receive a penalty against the UBI. A few might moan that this is the beginning of a government social engineering program, but to most people it will seem like quite a sensible and reasonable measure against normalization. It's so important to understand the concept of normalization and the way, for example, just in this lockdown that we've been under for a year, the goalposts moving. And there certainly has been pushback in the UK, for example, with massive protests, but they haven't really made a dent in the whole thing. And this has happened because they didn't tell us, okay, we're going to be locked down for a year, because no one would have accepted that back then in March or whenever they put us under lockdown. It all happened in a piecemeal fashion, slowly, until 1 year later, we're still here, still at home, making fucking videos about this, and here we are. So that's very important, I think, to understand. It's a slow manner in which these things happen. It's not all at once. And continues clipping people's basic income will soon see the most sensible and appropriate response to many crimes and misdemeanors. Not only could the state use the UBI as an instrument of social control, we have every reason to think that those in charge of the state would exercise their power for bad motives. This is the same class of people who launched a permanent war in the Middle East, wasting trillions of dollars and destroying millions of lives. They bailed out the banks from the public purse and gave themselves raises after telling the rest of the nation that we had to tighten our belts. They have robbed the young of the opportunity to own a home by sending house prices through the roof and mean to leave them a nation in ruinous debt. Again, what I talked about earlier. And just to give you a quick glimpse, actually, should I do this? Just a very quick, the Chinese cities using credit scores to keep tabs on dog owners. And this, again, is the World Economic Forum writing this in partnership with collaboration with Quartz or whatever. But what is incredible here is that they give no criticism. Sometimes, they're very good with this, I think, especially the World Economic Forum, at making up this fake resistance to some of the arguments they make. People are concerned about privacy and these things as if they are concerned about it. But here, there's literally no pushback against anything that the Chinese government is doing in order to ensure that dog owners are good dog owners. And, the system appears to have its intended effect. Local police who use an app to pull up dog files have so far penalized 1,430 pet owners, among whom 122 had lost their points as of early August. Okay, you need the context of the article. Apologies, I shouldn't have gone right to the conclusion. But just to show you the point, because I really think it's important to emphasize the way that there's no criticism of this. No, this is good. This is a good thing. Great, let's do it too here in the West. It's a regulatory system, the one for dog owners, similar to one implemented by the Chinese government in 2014. As a result of China's national social credit system, more than 11 million people have been banned from flying and around 4 million from taking the country's bullet trains as of April. Some cities, like Shanghai, have also developed their own credit scores in an effort to encourage better behavior. Again, you can make all sorts of great arguments for this as well. And I've talked about this before. It's, there are great arguments to be made for the enforcement of good behavior on a social level through the use of AI and these different technologies and super facial recognition cameras that can pick you up from a crowd or whatever. There's great arguments to be made. Arguably, you could have a very good society in that regard, but that's not even the issue. I mean, it is the issue, but my point here is that it raises all sorts of deep, very deep, probably the deepest philosophical questions that humanity has had to grapple with. What is freedom of choice? What is bodily autonomy? What is privacy? What are all these concepts that supposedly in the West we've had in our societies for so long, and that our societies are built on? Freedom of speech. What does this mean in a world where, we have another choice? We could have this socially engineered way of doing things, but that could potentially have better outcomes even. But is that the direction we want to head towards? Of course, I'm not going to dissect the whole philosophical questions around this, but I do think I want to bring your attention to them, because we are at a critical point in human history where we need to start thinking about these things and address them in a real way, because if we don't address them, the decisions are just going to be made for us. And that's also a massive element of what concerns me. But okay, we're getting towards the end now, and I just want to show you one last clip. I think it's about 4 or 5 minutes of the way that blockchain technology, which is part and parcel again of this fourth industrial revolution, data and 5G technology, and how it's been used in China. And so I especially want you to pay attention to what the Chinese professor says in a few parts of this clip, because it's so goddamn fascinating. Just the differences in culture, I guess. But, so yeah, this is the last clip I'm going to show you, and then I'll wrap it up after this, but I will see you in 5.5 minutes.
This is me using my face to get into a convenience store in China, where you can buy food through facial recognition technology. Using your face to buy food is already a reality. Here's one system that KFC and Chinese search engine giants Baidu implemented in China. KFC's system even remembers your face and food preferences, so it can better recommend you new products. Much like KFC, this convenience store we visited in the city of Shenzhen has partnered with a tech giant, in this case, the payment app WeChat Pay. to create an experimental face-to-food experience. The store, Zhouheya, encourages people to play and pay with facial recognition technology. With just your face and a simple thumbs up, the system will deduct money from your linked WeChat account.
Making my mobile payment, my facial recognition juice.
I come get this.
This may feel very dystopian, but facial recognition has apparently been a welcomed advancement in big cities in China.
So in China, the facial recognition is quite popular. In some scenarios, we try those face recognition techniques. So you don't have need to bring your mobile phone anymore. You simply show up and you take things away and it will directly be deducted from your account.
To grasp how close China is to making facial recognition a reality, you first have to understand how close they already are to being a cashless society. Much of this has to do with WeChat Pay and its competitor Alipay, which both use QR codes to complete transactions. According to Professor Ouyang, in 2017, mobile payment transactions in China added up to $20 trillion, almost double China's annual GDP. WeChat is what's known as a super app. You can send money, text friends, make dinner reservations, and much more all in one space. And this makes WeChat indispensable to everyday life.
即係話我哋咧，大部分人都係用緊微信。微信支付咧係一個好神奇嘅嘢。
This is my cousin, a Shenzhen native, and I roped him in to give us his perspective on how ubiquitous WeChat has become.
我平時出去都唔帶銀包㗎啦，銀包太大隻啦，冇手機咁方便。我手機可以代替到銀包所有功能。
QR codes, WeChat Pay, and Alipay have become the norm.
你可以喺路邊停車嘅時候交費，或者你甚至可以處理你嘅交通違法。
These payment apps are so powerful that they have the potential to replace banks for the users.
For example, you can move money on your WeChat app. If I press this, they will evaluate your credit profile.
This amount is the equivalent of an $8,000 loan. WeChat has become so ubiquitous in China that many people prefer it to traditional banking, despite these loans being backed by actual financial institutions. Analysts in China predict that about 40% of those transaction fees could go to payment apps like WeChat by 2020, leaving China's banks in a scramble.
The bank are annoyed because they only see numbers of money goes to Alibaba, go to WeChat. Those bank senior officials talk to me considering different ways of how to compete with those new institutions. And so far, they don't come up with very good ideas, but we're still trying.
With the wide use of QR codes and mobile payment apps, Professor Ouyang sees facial recognition as the obvious next step. But convenience is just the silver lining in what could be a sophisticated form of mass surveillance. Already in Shenzhen, facial recognition is being used to catch jaywalkers. 3 fugitives were caught at massive concerts this year through facial recognition technology. And in the highly policed province of Xinjiang, facial recognition is used to track Muslim Uyghurs.
There's a rumor that China is the safest country in the world. In Shenzhen, when you walk in the street, you'll see a lot of cameras. It sounds like a police state, right? But in China, if you don't do anything wrong, what do you feel?
Traveling in China has become nearly impossible without the use of QR codes and mobile payment apps. And a future with facial recognition may not be that far off.
一般如果你而家係想用現金嘅話咧，喺一啲小鋪頭嗰度，你攞一張100蚊嘅出嚟，佢甚至冇散紙可以找你，係。
Is the price of convenience worth the huge loss in privacy? To leave us with some words from the late and great Prince, who gave this speech at the Yahoo Internet Life Awards in 1999.
Don't be fooled by the internet. It's cool to get on the computer, but don't let the computer get on you.
My top concerns, if you will, encapsulated in this neat little 5.5-minute video about buying food with facial recognition in China, which, by the way, is part of another article by Activist Post titled 5G Blockchain and You, which I'll also link in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today. So to summarize, I see these digital vaccine passports as a critical juncture in world history, really, that will be quite difficult to come back from if implemented all over the world. And again, in order to understand this, you can't just look at the vaccine passport issue in isolation. You need to consider the larger context and where we are in history, especially from technological point of view, and the fact that we have technologies that give us the ability to do all these things, and from a financial point of view when it comes to inequality, wealth concentration at the top of society, and massive levels of national debt, which are causing the powers that be, again, to call for a massive reset, for which they need a social license, in other words, the larger public to accept and agree upon. So again, what are my main concerns? My main concerns are that these vaccine passports are going to be the first step towards a system not too dissimilar from what they have in China, with facial recognition, these super apps, as they call them. By the way, I talked about before the video, the professor, the whole ethos of, in China, if you do nothing wrong, there's nothing to worry about, right? And that, again, that statement in and of itself, I think, really cuts to the heart of this whole issue, because it really is the question of whether we want to live in a free society where people can make their own choices, their own mistakes, importantly, and fail and learn, or if we're gonna have a little, almost like a little electric shock. Not really an electric shock, of course, unless we really do get to that point, but little, how would you call them? Little prompts, technological ways that our behavior can be redirected towards purely good ends, supposedly, according to whatever the party in power, I guess, decides to be good ends. So, that's it for today, I think. I think I've laid out all these issues as well as I could, and of course, I always forget to mention things, but I will add whatever I forgot in the notes for the episode. And yeah, I'll be very curious to know what you think about all of this. I'll be very eager to receive plenty of criticism from people who disagree. And again, as I said at the end of the last episode, I would love to be proven wrong ultimately about all of this, because I don't want our world and our society to go down these potentially totalitarian, fascistic paths. And I think that's something that we should all be talking about, should be concerned about. And yeah, so anyway, I'll speak to you very soon. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Crossroads Show. Like and subscribe to the channel if you found this informative, useful, or if you just got some value from it, whatever it may be. And yeah, share it far and wide if people have the patience to watch a 1 hour sort of commentary on all of this. But yeah, I will speak to you soon. Have a lovely weekend. I'll be in touch very soon with a new episode of the Crossroads podcast. So stay tuned. Cheers, guys.